literary culture and the culture of literacy in Indonesia. I would like to start by expressing my great appreciation and gratitude to the Faculty of Cultural Sciences at Universitas Gadjah Mada and to Dr. Sri Margono and the organizing committee for inviting me to speak at this international symposium. Because it is an international symposium, I was asked to speak in English. I hope this will be acceptable. And I very much appreciate such a topical and stimulating theme of this symposium. This is because all my work over the past 3 decades as a curator for the Indonesian and Malay collections at the British Library in London has been concerned with literary culture and the culture of literacy in the Malay and Indonesian world of Nusantara. The British Library is the national library of the United Kingdom, equivalent to the Perpustakaan Nasional in Jakarta. So in the British Library, we have a very large collection of materials relating to Indonesia, including printed books in all languages, in English, French, German, Dutch, Italian, Chinese, Arabic, Malay, Indonesian. We also have archives and manuscripts, maps, drawings, photographs, archives, all related to Indonesia. But my own job in the British Library, my responsibility is for all the materials which are written in the languages of Nusantara. So manuscripts, printed books, newspapers and magazines written in Malay, Indonesian, Javanese, Balinese, Batak, Bugis and other languages from Southeast Asia, so from Malaysia, from Singapore, Brunei, Indonesia and the Philippines. My job as a curator is to look after these collections and also to catalogue them, to make sure that they are kept safe and to help researchers who come to the British Library to use these collections. We also have a responsibility to the general public. We are funded by the British taxpayer, so we are expected to explain our collections to the people, not of the country and of the world, through exhibitions and also through publications. So amongst the exhibitions that we have held in the British Library, the first one I did when I arrived was on early Malay printing. That was back in 1989. And there have been a series of exhibitions and books since then, including Golden Letters, Surat Emas, Budaya Tulis di Indonesia, which was held in Jakarta at the Perpustakaan Nasional and here in Yogyakarta in 1991 during the Festival Kraton. Another big exhibition in Malaysia was the legacy of the Malay letter, Warisan Warka Melayu, which examined Malay letters written in Malay from the whole of Southeast Asia and some others more recently. But in my 32 years working at the British Library, the biggest revolution in work has been the introduction of digitization. The reason it has been such a big change is that we still do all our traditional jobs like cataloguing, preservation, answering inquiries, helping readers, but we also have to do extra tasks related to digitization. But it is the most exciting part of our work because we can reach out to audiences and connect with people in a way we have never been able to do before. So, for example, digitization allows people to study rare materials from the British Library which normally in the past they would have to spend a lot of money travelling hundreds or thousands of kilometres to come to London, to stay in London, to visit the British Library and to see with their own eyes. But now they can study in their own houses, at midnight, in the cafe, or in the bus, anywhere in the world. So it's a very, very exciting, it opens so many exciting possibilities. But the interesting thing is that 20 years now after digitization became embedded in institutions like libraries and museums, at first people thought, oh, this will be the end of the paper book, the end of libraries, everything will be digital. And the answer is certainly not. In the British Library in London, we are busier than ever before. We have more people, real people, flesh and blood people coming into the building than ever before. So digital images will never replace the real thing, but they enhance them. It's something like it's a bonus, an added extra. And sometimes digitization just opens people's minds and eyes to the existence of treasures that they wouldn't have known about before. Also, people often ask me, oh, is everything in the British Library digitized? And the modern answer to that would be dream on. It will never all be digitized. There are about 15 million items in the British Library, and digitization is quite a complex and costly and time-consuming process. So we will never get to the stage where everything is digitized. We have to be quite strategic, and therefore we emphasize, we prioritize the most important and the rarest materials. At its best, digitization both facilitates and enhances traditional modes of scholarship, but it also enables studies that would never have happened before. And so today I would like to talk about both these two aspects of scholarship which have been enabled and enhanced by digitization. I mentioned that digitization is quite an extensive process, and the photography, the photographing of the material is actually only a very small part of the cost. For example, as many of you will know, we are currently embarked on a very exciting project to digitize Javanese manuscripts from Yogyakarta, 75 manuscripts in the British Library. So every manuscript has to be checked by a conservator before digitization. Sometimes there are small tears that need to be repaired. Sometimes there's very bad damage from insects, which if it is not repaired, even when you turn the pages, the text will just crumple away. And you can see this is the manuscript before repair and this after. So this is a very time-consuming process and a very specialist one. So after the manuscripts have been checked by a conservator, they then go to the photographic studio to be photographed by a very expert photographer. The books have to be strapped. You can see these are just Velcro straps which are used to keep the back of the book fixed very tightly, but it has, in order to get the page as flat as possible, so the photographer will photograph the whole book with only the left-hand pages first, and then turn the volume around, and then digitize, photograph all the right-hand pages. This is because otherwise you would have to move the camera and refocus every 2 pages, and that is a waste of resources. So you photograph everything on one side first, and then everything on the other side. But there are some manuscripts which are very difficult to photograph. For example, this is a Javanese manuscript with many additions to the text which have been sewn, dijahit. They are sewn onto one page to show where the additional text should be read. So to photograph this page, it's very difficult. You have to photograph one page about 3 or 4 times. You cannot cut off the additions because that is an integral part of the manuscript's history. You have to fold them to reveal one part of the text underneath and then fold them in another way. So just one page will take maybe 4 or 5 different shots. After photography, every single image has to be checked for quality control. Sometimes there's a little bit of dirt or a hair from the photographer has fallen down. We photograph everything on the left first and then everything on the right, and so the project assistant has to check that the images have been combined in the right order, and sometimes the photographer has just forgotten one image. Human error always occurs. So then when my assistant Kate Thomas discovers this, she has to tell the photographer to get the manuscript out again and re-photograph 1 or 2 images. So in the project of 75 manuscripts, maybe 20% will need to go back to the photographer for 1 or 2 images. It's a very complex procedure. And then even when all the images are finished, the metadata, the catalogue description, has to be uploaded to the online catalogue. That is my job. But I am very lucky because there is a wonderful catalogue, as you know, by Rickles and Voorhoeven of all the Indonesian manuscripts in British collections, and all the Javanese manuscripts were catalogued by Rickles. And so I have used those descriptions for our online catalogue, but I have still had to put all the information into the computer with extra information on each manuscript. As you probably know, traditional philologists were not very interested in art. Ibn Sakti knows this very well. They loved the text, but they paid no attention to the decoration or the materiality of the manuscript. So most manuscript catalogues will not mention if a manuscript is illuminated or if it has decoration. So in re-cataloguing the manuscripts, I try to note any decoration in the manuscripts. Then when it is published online, digitization is very expensive, and there is no point digitizing unless you can get maximum benefit from your project, which means telling the people who want to know what it is that you've just digitized. And it's a very crowded digital universe, so you have to target your audience quite carefully. So we digitize manuscripts in many languages in the British Library: Chinese, Arabic, a lot of Latin manuscripts from Europe. They all go on the same platform. So for Indonesian manuscripts, for Javanese, for Malay, we really need to do a dedicated program of outreach to tell people what is out there. So we use mainly our blog. We have the Asian and African Studies blog, where we write stories and make announcements. You can subscribe to the blog very easily with an email address, and we send you new updates every week when there's a new story. So we use the blog as our main, it's like a press release to announce what we are doing in the library. But the blog alone is not enough. It is certainly not enough to target most audiences in Indonesia, for example. So we have to use social media quite intensively, like Facebook. So I will, for any Indonesian or Malay blog, I will post on Facebook, and then we hope that it will be shared further. So for example, this is something that I put up about a week ago, and then we are very happy when it is shared by colleagues and other scholars in the field. And recently I found that even Facebook is not enough anymore. So I had to really memberanikan diri and enter the world of Twitter. quite a steep learning curve because it takes a lot of, Twitter is very quick to read, but very time-consuming to manage. So I now use Twitter, and you're welcome, please, to follow me at VLMalay. And almost every day I put up a new posting about a new manuscript we have digitized, and then hopefully it will get spread around. And it's very nice comments we have. So somebody here says, 15,000 foto dokumen digital dari naskah koleksi Jogja baru diunggah oleh the British Library. Yang mau skripsi jurnal filologi sekarang nggak ada alasan untuk mencari literaturnya lagi. So it's really wonderful. We have a big group of friends, supporters, helping to spread the message. And of course, this is, so the digitized manuscript is for the higher scholars, like Pak Margono will look at every new manuscript and maybe read every word, but most people won't. So the blog tells the story behind the manuscripts, what it's about, a little nukilan about the trita, what the story is. Facebook alerts you to what it is. Twitter shows you some beautiful pictures. But sometimes we still have to work harder to memasyarakatkan naskah, to really reach out to people who don't read any traditional scripts, but maybe can be interested. So just for example, this is a digitized image from one of our Bugis manuscripts. It is a buku harian, the diary of a very senior official from the court of Bone in Sulawesi Selatan. And it's a wonderful image, and it's very, very rare. This is the only full-page painting, figural painting I know from a Bugis manuscript. Sometimes you get very small details in Bugis manuscripts, but this is the only big painting. I used to have a wonderful project assistant called Sarah Biggs, who's now in America, but I asked, she's a real technical wizard. So I said to her, can you make my Bugis horse fly? And she did. So this is the way in which we can really bring manuscripts alive, I think. And I think there are just a lot of lessons here about what can be done with manuscripts to bring them to the attention. So there is something for everyone. People think manuscripts, oh, membosankan, it's something that's dead. But we really try and find ways to give something for everybody. So Pak Margono, I think the Damargula, you can do the manuscript, you can do something very nice like this. So this gift has been viewed hundreds of times on my Facebook page. Most digitization projects are externally funded. They are very expensive, and we cannot fund them in the British Library with our normal government funds. We have to look for external funding. So all our Malay manuscripts were funded thanks to the generosity of two American bankers who are based in Singapore, William and Judith Bollinger, and they gave money to digitize the complete collection of Malay manuscripts in the British Library, about 120 manuscripts, for a collaboration with the National Library of Singapore. Recently, we have been very fortunate through the generosity of Bapak S.P. Lohia, who is an Indonesian citizen of Indian heritage, who has generously funded the digitization of the 75 manuscripts from Yogyakarta, Kraton, which are in the British Library, with a very, very generous gift. And we are also, as the next project, planning to digitize all the Bugis manuscripts in the British Library, also with funding from the Bollingers. Now, digitization greatly enhances traditional philological studies of texts. For example, if you are studying a single text, like Ibu Almarhumah Ibu Eti Mulyadi's edition of Hikayat Sri Indraputra, or Ibu Akhyati's Hikayat Sri Rama, if you have a manuscript, then it greatly enhances access. And of course, and something I was very, very happy to hear about the responses we get from scholars of philology in universities through our digitization projects. This is one of the most pleasurable emails I received from Pak Asep Yuda in Solo, the Universitas 11 Maret, who told me that perlu Ibu ketahui bahwa semenjak koleksi naskah digital British Library dapat diakses publik, minat mahasiswa untuk mempelajari naskah kuno di tempat kami meningkat drastis. Ya. Dulu sebelum ada akses terhadap koleksi naskah digital, perangkatan biasanya peminat bidang filologi hanya 3 atau 5 mahasiswa saja. Kini peminatnya menjadi 10 atau 15 mahasiswa setiap tahun. That is absolutely vindicates, it shows what the value of digitization is. But for this symposium, we were invited in the core papers to ponder on the most influential works in the field. And for traditional philological study, this means catalogues of manuscripts. And so in my field, probably this is the single most important publication in the original edition of 1977 by Merle Rickless and Petrus Voorhoeven, the Indonesian manuscripts in Great Britain, which listed 1,200 manuscripts in all the languages of Southeast Asia, so Malay, Indonesian, Malay, Javanese, Batak, Bugis, Makassar, Lampung, and others, Sunda, Jawa Kuno, held in all the different public collections in the UK, 1,200 manuscripts. And of course, there are other important catalogues like Pichot's catalogue of the Javanese manuscripts in Leiden University Library, Tengku Iskandar's catalogue of Malay, Minangkabau and South Sumatra manuscripts, and also Edwin Vieringer's. But to return to the theme of this symposium, what can influential publications like this tell us about literary culture and the culture of literacy in Indonesia? Are the many copies of Hikayat Orang Tua, Sejarah Melayu, Hikayat Indra Putra, which are held in London and Leiden, listed in these catalogues, do they accurately reflect what was written and what was read in Nusantara? And I think the short answer is no, not really, or only partially. Although they undoubtedly document the high points of literary achievement, these manuscript catalogues are not a true reflection of the writing culture and traditions of the region. Instead, they are a reflection of the interests of the colonial scholar officials who collected and sometimes commissioned them, and their Enlightenment era preoccupations with the study of history, literature, and traditional legal structures, undang-undang, accompanied by a marked lack of interest in and even antipathy towards Islam. Now, this realization for me only crystallized with the second wave of digitization, which I'd now like to speak of. This is the digitization not of manuscripts within scholarly collections, mostly in Europe, or colonial era institutions like the Perpustakaan Nasional in Jakarta, but manuscripts in the field, still held within the communities which created and consumed them, even if at present some of the manuscripts have fallen into disuse. In 2004, the Endangered Archives Programme was founded at the British Library, funded by a charitable foundation called Arcadia. The aim was to digitize archives all over the world deemed to be endangered, in the sense that if nothing was done, in the long run, these archives would disappear through neglect or environmental damage or destruction. Since 2004, 350 projects have been funded all over the world, from Bolivia to Siberia, including 19 projects in Indonesia and 3 or 4 more in the rest of Nusantara. The first Indonesian project was led by Amit Ahyad to digitize the manuscript collections of 3 pesantren in East Java, and this was followed by projects in Aceh, West Sumatra, Jambi, Kerinci, Riau, Makassar and Ambon, and most recently in Bima and Kampar. Now, from a survey of the Indonesian projects, 2 key findings can be presented. Firstly, the vast majority of the manuscripts, about 95%, were religious in the broadest sense, covering not just copies of the Quran or selections from the Quran, prayer books, but also works on fiqh, on Sufism, and grammars of Arabic used in a pesantren context. Secondly, the majority of these manuscripts, around 60% at least, were in Arabic. These findings paint a radically different picture of literary culture and the culture of literacy in Nusantara from that gained from a study of manuscripts in colonial era collections. And this has important implications for the understanding of what was written and read in Nusantara in previous centuries. So arising out of this treasury of newly visible and accessible manuscript material, 3 areas can be proposed for further exploration. Firstly is the world of Arabic manuscripts from Southeast Asia, which has been sorely neglected. Rickles and Voorhoeven's masterly catalogue of Indonesian manuscripts in British collections covered all Indonesian languages, but not Arabic. In Europe, the study of the manuscripts in Europe from Great Britain to the Netherlands, to France or Germany, would be unthinkable without the prime place given to Latin, and Arabic played a similar role in Southeast Asia, but has always been neglected in traditional philological institutions. So in general, the study of Arabic manuscripts has suffered a 2-fold neglect. Within Southeast Asia and among philologists of the Leiden school, which influenced all the other major centres of study, including SOAS at the University of London, where I studied, and other European institutions, original vernacular compositions were privileged, and Arabic texts were generally seen as derivative or merely copies of canonical texts like the Quran and prayer books. On the other hand, Arabic scholars in universities all over the world tended to neglect Southeast Asia as a peripheral region barely worthy of mention. There are, of course, just a few notable exceptions. For example, the work of Anthony Johns, Peter Riddell, Michael Laffan, Ibu Nabila Lubis, and Oman Fatur Rahman. And in fact, one of the first publications to give Arabic its due was the wonderful book published by the Lontar Foundation in 1996, Illuminations, which included at the very beginning, setting the stage for Indonesian manuscripts, a chapter on Arabic manuscripts. Now, to give just one example of how digital collections of Arabic manuscripts from Nusantara are contributing to our understanding of the past, is a recent article by Dr. Mulaika Hijaz of SOAS, who looked at one particular manuscript, newly digitized by Endangered Archives, which is held in a surau in West Sumatra, which was founded by Sheikh Abdul Rahman in about 1840. So this is an Arabic manuscript containing a number of texts. And in an article which was just published last year in Indonesia and the Malay World, called Marks of Many Hands, Annotation in the Malay Manuscript Tradition, Mulaika Hijaz found that in this manuscript, which is in Arabic, there is a marginal annotation, first in Arabic and then with a Malay translation, which cites Ibn Arabi. Now, West Sumatra in the early 19th century was a site of strong contestation between reformist Islam and older beliefs. And to find Ibn Arabi cited in a text used in a surah and still held up till today is, I think, quite as Mulaika pointed out, really not what you would expect. And it's an example of the snippets of information you can find in these manuscripts which really have the potential to shape our understanding of the context of literacy in which they were created. So, moving on from the study of Arabic texts as one area which I really feel is ripe for major expansion, the next big area is conversely a consideration of the multilingual context within which literary culture and the culture of literacy in Nusantara flourished. While the role of Arabic certainly needs foregrounding, it should also be acknowledged that everywhere that Arabic was used, other languages were also taught, studied, and read. And a different combination was found in different locations. And this is another factor that digitization programs like Endangered Archives have highlighted. So for projects in Aceh, you will find that within one location there are manuscripts written in Arabic, Acehese in Malay, whereas if you go to Buton, you find manuscripts in Arabic, Wolio, and Malay. Just as there has been a recognition of the value of multidisciplinary studies, in programs on manuscript cultures, there is a need for integrated multilingual philological studies. However, traditional philological programs have militated against this approach. In nearly every single faculty, you'll find there's the study of Malay literature happens here, Javanese here, and if you're lucky, Bugis or Makassar, elsewhere. Just for example, the manuscripts from a single collection from Banten in Leiden University Library will be listed in separate catalogues of Arabic, Malay, and Javanese manuscripts, which serves to hide or to veil their common origin and history. And so this is another area ripe for study, which is an examination of the factors which determine which languages were used and within which spheres in different parts of Nusantara and at different times. The third area proposed for further study, and this is all stimulated by these new collections being digitized, is genres of texts that are simply not well represented in traditional older libraries. A very good example is sermons khutbah. The British Library, for example, holds only one khutbah manuscript out of its large collections of about 600 Indonesian manuscripts, only one khutbah, and even that is fairly recently acquired. However, various Endangered Archives programs have digitized large numbers of khutbah sermon manuscripts, including the program led by Ibu Dr. Professor Titi Pujiastuti to Ambon. 51 sermons were digitized, and they also all mostly have a very unique codicological form of scroll format, which is very unusual actually in Nusantara, and they are often rolled and stored in bamboo containers. Some of these manuscripts are very recent, and you can tell just from the emblem and the logo used. These are dating from the 1980s, but they are manuscripts to the Santana, they are handwritten, they are all unique manuscripts. But others appear to be of some considerable age. In the classical Muslim tradition, every king had two perquisites: to mint coins and to have the weekly Friday sermon read in his name. And so one very valuable aspect of khutbah manuscripts is the mentioning of the local ruler in whose name they were read. And some of the khutbah manuscripts from Ambon mention the name of the Sultan of Ternate, the traditionally acknowledged overlord of the islands. And in this particular manuscript, which was digitized by Ibu Titik's team, we find the name of the Sultan of Ternate given with his full genealogy going back at more than 5 generations through to the 15th century. So this is material of profound historical interest, and yet found in a genre of text where historians would not normally think to look. So this is a very exciting time to be studying manuscript cultures in Nusantara. And what it has led on to, personally for me and for my colleague Malaika, is we have been recently successful in securing funding for a PhD scholarship jointly supervised by myself at the British Library and Dr. Malaika at SOAS in the Department of Southeast Asia, entitled Shifting Landscapes, and that's why I chose it as the title of my talk this morning, Mapping the Intellectual Writing Traditions of Islamic Southeast Asia, which aims to look at these newly digitized collections of manuscripts and to investigate the new light thrown on writing traditions. We have just appointed the successful candidate. Her name is Jenny Norton-Wright, who will start work at SOAS this month. She has a background in Arabic, and her aim is to look at Arabic grammar manuscripts like Ajurumia, which are found all over Nusantara and Aceh and Java, as part of a study to investigate how Arabic was studied and taught in Southeast Asia through manuscripts. And I would suggest that there's room for many more such studies, especially with other digitization programs. In addition to endangered archives, there's the new Dream Sea program and many others active in Indonesia. And so, to conclude, for the past 2 centuries, studies of the literary culture and writing traditions of Nusantara have been fundamentally shaped by the collections of manuscripts held in European institutions, primarily those in the United Kingdom and the Netherlands, and those formed under colonial auspices, such as the Perpustakaan Nasional in Jakarta. These collections themselves reflect the interests of their collectors, who are mainly European scholars and government officials from the early 19th century onwards, whose interests were focused on literary, historical, and legal compositions in vernacular languages such as Malay and Javanese. Relatively little attention was paid to works on Islam written in Arabic or in Malay and Arabic, and hence such manuscripts are very poorly represented in such institutions. However, digitization programs like the Endangered Archives program reveals that the profile of manuscripts still held in the field in private mosque surau collections differs radically from those in Western libraries, primarily through the very high proportion of Islamic texts. I have noted certain areas for future research into Arabic manuscripts, into the variety of multilingual settings across the archipelago, each with their own nuances, and the opportunity to explore new genres of texts. Other fields of study that could be proposed include paleography, for example, the study of handwriting, or even the study of codicological aspects like bindings, which are not usually found in colonial collections because most manuscripts are rebound in Western collections, but in collections in private, still in private hands, they still have the original bindings. Thus, as more digitized collections emerge, they will increasingly show how our understanding of the landscape and ecology of the intellectual writing traditions of the region needs to be radically redrawn in the light of these newly accessible primary source materials.